Welcome to part 7 of this Excel VBA user forms tutorial. This part of the series is going to talk about ListBox controls, which are just similar enough to combo boxes that if you've watched the previous part of the series, you'll be right at home with the basics already. So we're going to cover these fairly quickly: how to draw and format list boxes, how to populate the list using both the row source and the list properties, and then how to refer to the selected value in a single selection list box. The thing that makes list boxes massively different to combo boxes is the ability to allow multiple selections. So I'm going to show you how you can enable that, and then how to loop through the list items and identify the items that have been selected. So that's going to involve a bit of looping and a bit of a talk about arrays there as well. The last little part of the video is going to quickly show you how you can add new items to a list while the form's running, so changing that at runtime. So a few things to do here, let's get started. I'd like to run over the basics of using list boxes relatively quickly, mainly because they work a lot like combo boxes do at a basic level. So if you've watched the previous video in the series, which hopefully you have, then you'll already know a lot about how list boxes work. So the example we're going to use is we're going to add an extra column to our list of film data, which stores the film genre, or eventually genres. And again, this list is going to be populated based on data we've already added to the spreadsheet. So if I look at my lists sheet, I've created a simple genres list with all the possible genres. There may be more to add later on, so we'll deal with that as part of the video. One thing I haven't done with this example is I haven't given this list a range name. We're not going to use range names quite so much to reference cells. This is going to be based on a much more dynamic, flexible list. So the starting point for this video is how to draw a list box on the form. So let's head back to the Visual Basic editor, and then we'll open up our form and get to the job of adding a list box. I'm going to draw my list box in a separate section of the form to keep it separate from the basic details. So to do that, I'm going to increase the width of the form first of all, and I'm going to draw a separate frame. Now the frame's not necessary, it's just a nice way to group together all the controls that will be related to the film genres. So having drawn the frame, I'm going to give that one a sensible name. So I'm going to call this one Film Genres Frame. And then we'll also give it a sensible label as well, which will be something simple like Film Genres. There we go, and here's the caption, Film Genres. And then inside there, I'd like to draw my list box. In fact, I'm going to make the frame itself a bit taller first of all. Then from the toolbox, we're going to find the list box tool, which should be sitting right next door to the combo box. So you click on the tool, as usual, and then draw one on the form. We'll give the list box a sensible name. I'm going to call this one Film Genres. And then the next step is to populate it with a list of options. Populating a list box works in exactly the same way as populating a combo box. So a simple way to do it would be to set the row source property of the list box. So looking into the properties window, I can find the row source, and I can just type in, if I know the cell references and the name of the worksheet, which is lists, I can just type in the name of the sheet, followed by an exclamation mark, and then the cell references, which in this case was G2 to G18, I believe. So as soon as I do that, I'll see that my list box gets populated. I've got some basic formatting properties I can modify as well, so just like I have with the combo box, I can modify the list style, so I can modify it from plain to option, which makes it look a little bit neater, and that's the simplest way by far to populate the list box. As we mentioned in the previous video, the row source property, although it's quick and easy to use, makes your list a little bit inflexible. Once the row source property has been set, you can't then modify that list at runtime, so you can't add items or remove items from the list. For the purposes of this video, we need that to be allowed, so we're going to remove the row source property, or the value we've added to the row source property, and instead we're going to populate the list using the list property in much the same way as we did for the combo box in the previous video. So that involves going to the initialize event of the form, so I can click on the form's background and just hit the F7 key to go to its code view. So I've got all the same code that I had in there previously, and then all we're going to do at this point is we're going to add in a line of code that populates the film genres list. So I'm going to use a relative range selection technique to do this. I'm going to set the film genres list property to be equal to WSLists.range G2. That's the top cell in the list, or the cell that's got the first genre in it. And the bottom cell in the list I can reference by saying WSLists.range G2, or G1, it doesn't really matter in this case actually. If I refer to G1, that's the very top cell in the list. G1 isn't the cell that I'm interested in, of course. The cell that I'm interested in is the cell that's at the end of the list from G1 in a downwards direction. Make sure I refer to the value property. Again, these techniques we've discussed in a lot of detail in the previous series, the Excel VBA series. So there's an entire video all about range selections and why, how this works. So if you need some more detail on that, that's probably the best place to start. I'm just going to tidy up a little bit, just get rid of some sample code that I left in there previously, just to keep this a little bit neater and tidier than it currently is. So, having done all that, what we should find now is if we go back to the Excel workbook, and then just head back to the menu sheet and launch the form, that list will be populated with all of the items from column G, effectively, from our list sheet. The next thing we need to be able to do is refer to the value that the user selected in a list box. And once again, that works in a very similar way to combo boxes. So let's go back to the code behind our Add to List button, and we'll go to our Add Data to List procedure. And what I'd like to do, as well as having added in all the details from the text boxes and the combo box, is finally add in the details from the list box as well. So here we're going to refer to the cell that is 5 columns across from the film's name, so active cell 0,5. Dot value equals. Then I can simply say film genres dot value. Just as simple as that, exactly the same as for basic combo boxes and text boxes. So having done that, what I'm going to do is go back to Excel and then give this one quick test, heading to the menu sheet, launching the form. Let's add in Deadpool again, and we'll have a gross of 731 million, and then the release date was 12 Feb 2016. And the certificate was 15 in the UK, so we're using UK certificates here, 15. And then finally I can select one genre from the list. Let's go with, well, it falls into several, doesn't it? Let's choose action to start with and choose add to list. So we'll see at this point we get the value of the single selected item added into the appropriate cell. So that's the absolute basics of referencing values in a list box. One feature which really does distinguish a list box from a combo box is the ability to select multiple items. To do that, you can change a property of the list box in the Properties window, look for the Multi-Select property. By default, it'll be set to Multi-Select Single. But we can change that to one of two different options. If I choose Multi-Select Multi and then run the form, what I can do is select any number of individual items, one by one by one. The other option there was Extended, so if I go back to the design view of the form and select the list box again, and then I'll change the multi-select property to extended this time. What I can do this time if I run the form is if I select any single item, I can then hold down the Shift key and click on any other item in the list, and it will automatically select everything in between. So those are the three different options. I'm just going to switch this back so it's multi-select multi rather than extended, and then we need to talk about how we can reference the individual items that we have selected. Now, although we do have the ability to select multiple items in the list box, we can't yet return the values we've selected. So if I were to check these three boxes and click Add to List, we'll find that all of the details get added to the worksheet except for any of the genres. The reason this is happening is because we're still referring to the value property of the list box, and the value property doesn't actually return anything when you have a multi-value list box. So we need a different approach. Let's head back to the Visual Basic editor and go to the Add to List button, and we're going to add a bit of extra code now that's going to refer to all of the selected items in our list box. To do this, we're going to write a function which returns a comma-separated string of all the selected items in the list box. I'm going to put this in just below our subroutine which adds our data to the list, and then we'll call it into here a little bit later on. So I'm going to start by declaring my private function, which will be called something like selected genres, and then we're going to return a string from this. So we'll set the data type or the return type as a string. Now the approach that we have to take here is to loop through all of the items contained within the list and check for each one whether it has been selected. And this whole approach relies on two separate properties of our list box. So if I refer to my film genres list box, one of the properties we need to refer to is the list property. This returns an array which contains the values of all the items. So this contains the words action, adventure, comedy, etc. The other property we have to rely on is the property called selected. Now selected also returns an array containing the same number of items as the list array, but all this contains is the value true or false that specifies whether or not the item has been selected. So this approach helps a lot if you know something about arrays, and again in the original Excel VBA tutorial series there's an entire video all about how arrays work. So we're just going to give you the basics here of how to make this loop work. So let's start by declaring a variable which we can use to keep track of the number of the item we're on. I'm going to call my variable something nice and simple like I as an integer. You might want to give it a more descriptive name like loop counter, for instance, but I will do for me. Now we have to begin a loop that will count through all of the individual items in the list. So we're going to use a for next loop to do that. So I'm going to say for I equals, then the index number of the first item in the list will have an index of 0. It's a 0-based index. And then we have to carry on looping until we reach the highest numbered item in the list. So one way to refer to this is to refer to the film genres.list count property. So this counts literally the number of items in the list. The problem is because we were using a 0-based index, we need to subtract 1 from that number to loop through the correct range. Now if you already know something about arrays, you may be familiar with a couple of functions that can calculate the lower bound and upper bound index numbers of items in an array. So rather than having to worry about remembering that this is a 0-based index and remembering to subtract 1 from the list count, what we could do instead is simply say for I equals lbound, and then refer to the list property of our film genres list, so film genres.list, to ubound, film genres.list. So this will simply work out what the lower bound and upper bound index numbers of the items in the array are. So we only need one of these two techniques, either will work. Personally, I prefer to use the lbound and ubound functions. That means I have less work to do to remember what the base of the index numbers are. All we've got to do now is close off the loop to say next I, and then we can sort out how we refer to the individual items in the list. Now to test if an item has been selected, we can refer to the selected property of the list box. So we're going to use an if statement to check if film genres.selected. And the selected property requires the index number of the item you're testing for. So our index number is held in the integer variable, the I counter variable. And this function or this property will return a Boolean value, true or false. So we could say if film genres.selected I equals true, then do something. But because it's a Boolean logic, we don't need the equals true part. The succinct version is if film genres.selected, then. We'll add in the end if statement, and then we can work out how to start building our list. To build up the list, we're going to reference the current list of items that we've currently got selected, and then concatenate to that the new item plus a comma at the end. So we're going to use the name of the function to do this. We're going to refer to selected genres equals itself selected genres and the new item that is selected. So to refer to the item that has been selected, we need to refer to our film genres list box again, and then refer to the list property this time, and again pass into this the index number of the item that we've established has been selected. All we have to do then is add on a comma at the end, ready for the next item that we'll add in to make sure that's separated with a comma. What that will leave us with at the end is a list with a rogue extra comma stuck right at the end. So what we're going to do is one last little bit of string manipulation. Just after we've finished looping through all of the items, we're going to say selected genres equals all the characters to the left of selected genres, and where the length of the string I want to return is equal to the length of selected genres minus 1. So that'll just return everything except for that last rogue comma at the end. All we have to do now then is call this function in the add to list subroutine. So where we've previously referred to the film genres value, we can replace that with a call to the selected genres function. So this will simply change the value of the cell to be equal to the result returned by that function. What we can do now is go back into Excel and give it another test. So we can go back to the menu sheet and show the form on screen, and we'll add in a new film to the list. So we'll add Deadpool, not so new a film after all. We've added this one so many times in this set of videos, mainly so I can avoid having to remember the release dates and gross values for lots of different films. So it's helped me out more than you really. So the 15 certificate, and then I should be able to select multiple different items here. So we'll action, adventure, comedy, click the add to list button, and finally we end up with a list of all the selected genres. One thing we do have a problem with here, and in fact something we haven't mentioned yet in this video, is what happens if the user doesn't select an item from the list. At this point, if I click my Add to List button, my subroutine is going to fail. It's purely to do with how I've tried to trim off that trailing comma at the end of the list of selected genres. So we need to solve this issue. I'm going to hit the end button to stop running the procedure, then head back to the Visual Basic editor and go back to the code behind that selected genres function. Now the reason the error occurs in the first place is because if I don't select any items in the list, the length of the selected genre's text is equal to 0. If I subtract 1 from that, I get -1, and then I'm trying to return -1 characters from the left of a 0-length string, which clearly isn't going to work. So we're going to need to add in a quick if statement just to check if the len of the selected genres is already greater than 0. Only then do we want to subtract 1 from the end to remove the trailing comma. So let's get rid of that, add in an end if statement, and then that should work. So let's give this one a quick little test. If we go back to Excel, and then we shall show our form on screen. And I don't really care about what values to type in here as long as they're valid. And then we can hopefully add to list without selecting any items in the list box, and we'll just end up with an empty string passed into the cell. This function also gives us a neat way to apply some validation to the list box. We know that if nothing gets selected in the list box, then we return an empty string from the function, so we can rely on that and use it as part of our everything filled in function that we created in an earlier part of the series. So just scrolling back up a little bit, here's the everything filled in function. We're going to add another little if statement towards the end. After we finish looping through the controls in the film details frame, we're going to check if selected genres equals an empty string, then I'll add in my end if statement. So we know that that means that the user hasn't selected any items. So the important thing that we can do is say everything filled in equals false, so we prevent the user from continuing. We could also do some formatting changes to indicate to the user that something's gone wrong. Now it is possible at this point to change the back colour or the fore colour of our list box. The problem is getting the colour to change back afterwards. I want to show you quickly what I mean by that. So I'm going to say film genres dot back colour equals RGB pink. Let's keep it consistent with everything else. And we'll just give this one a quick test. If I head back into Excel now and then show the form on screen and just click my add to list button without typing in or selecting anything from the list box. So the back colour changes to the same colour that we've indicated for all the other controls. Now we got to the stage in the previous controls where changing the values back will then reset the formatting, but getting that to work for a list box is actually remarkably difficult. So I'm going to close down the form and head back to the Visual Basic editor, and we want to have a quick look at why this is so tricky. So let's have a look at some of the basic events we could use for the list box. If I double click on it to get to the code view, it'll generate the click event. So there's one possible suggestion. We could change the film genres list box back colour back to white when we click on it. While I'm here, I want to quickly look at a couple of the other events. So let's have a look at the previous ones we've seen, things like the change event. So let's just do exactly the same thing in there. We will change the back colour back to white there. We can use the after update event or the before update event as well. These are all things we're familiar with, we've seen before. So let's just add in the same piece of code to every single one of these. So that should cover all of our bases. Whenever we do anything with the list box, essentially, it's going to try to change its background colour back to white. If we go back to Excel then, and then just try to do the same thing, show the form on screen, add something to the list without having selected anything, when we click the checkboxes, absolutely nothing seems to happen. In terms of the back colour, those events are definitely firing in the background. You can write simple tests to prove that, but the back colour of the box doesn't change back, which is really frustrating. I've spent hours of my life trying to solve this little issue. So we need to take a different approach to getting this to work. So let's close the form down and head back to the Visual Basic editor and think about what else we could do. One possibility, although it doesn't look quite as nice, would be rather than to change the background colour of the list box, change the background colour of the frame in which it sits. So if I go back to the click event of the Add to List button and then scroll down to the Everything Filled In function, we can change, rather than the background colour of the film genres list box, we can change the background colour of the film genres frame instead. And that means that with our film genres events, we can then change the colour of the frame back to the way it was before. So let's get rid of some of these event procedures. I'll get rid of the click event and we'll get rid of the before and after update events, and instead we'll just rely on the change event. So I'll change the film genres frame back colour back to RGB white. So just to test this out, if I head back to Excel and then once again show the form on screen and add to list without selecting anything. I say it doesn't look quite as nice, it looks fairly horrific in fact, but the important thing is that we can actually get the frame colour to change back on the change of the list box. So it's not the most elegant solution in the world, but it kind of works, and I think that's what we're going to stick with just for this video. The final thing we were going to do in this video is give the user the opportunity to add in new items to our list box should they not find the item they're after. So for instance, there's no superhero genre in the list, so the user might want to add that. So we're going to achieve that by adding a text box and a simple button into the same frame. So let's go back to the Forms Design view first of all and add in those extra items. We'll start by making this frame a little bit wider, just so we've got enough room for the objects we're going to add in. We'll start with a label at the top. So we'll add in a label which will enter, we'll change its name so it's called New Genre Label. And its caption can be something simple like New Genre. Then we'll have a text box below that. So we bring back the toolbox and draw a text box below. And we'll call this one just New Genre. Then we'll have a button below that the user can click on to add that into our list. And we'll change the button's name, so that's called Add New Genre. And the caption can be something similar. Okay, so those are the three new objects we're going to draw. All we need to do now is add a bit of code to the Add New Genre button so that it will add whatever the user's typed in into our existing list. So we can double click the Add New Genre button to launch or generate its click event handler, and then we should check that the text box has been filled in first. So let's say if new genre.value is not equal to an empty string, then we'll say end if, and then we will say film genres.add item. And then all we need to do is specify or refer to the value of the new genre text box, so new genre.value. We probably want to make sure that we don't inadvertently add the same item twice. So once we've added the new genre, we're going to clear its contents by saying new genre.value equals an empty string. And that will achieve the basics. So if we then go back to test this on the form, what we should find when we launch the form is if there's a genre in the list that we don't have, so for instance superhero, as I was saying, let's say superhero, if I click the Add New Genre button, that'll get added into the bottom of the list, and I can now select it just in the same way that any other item can be selected. One small problem with what we've done here is that although we've successfully added an item to our list box, if we close the form down and then reopen it, that item will have disappeared. And that's simply because this list box is populated based on values stored in cells in the worksheet. So what we should also do, if we're storing an item in our list box, we want to make it permanent, we should also add that value to the cells in the worksheet. So I'm going to close down the form and then head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then we can go back to the Add New Genre button and add a new bit of code. Before we clear the contents of the new genre text box, we should write some code that will add it to the end of the list on the worksheet. Now the list of genres is held in column G on the WS Lists worksheet. So what I'm going to do here is say wslists.range g1.end xl down .offset 1,0 .value equals new genre .value. And that will have the simple effect of adding it into the list of cells on the worksheet as well. So if I go back and test this one now, and then launch the form again, and I'm going to add in the superhero genre again, and add that to the list. So it adds itself in at the bottom. If I close the form down and this time reopen it again, I'll find that superhero is still in the list. We also need to be careful that the user doesn't add a genre that already exists. So for instance, if I typed in superhero yet again, spell it properly, and then click the Add New Genre button, then I get superhero added in twice, and that is definitely going to cause a problem. So that not only gets added to the list on the form, it also gets added to the list in the worksheet as well. So I'm going to manually delete these just for the moment, and then we're going to go back and add some more code that checks if that genre already exists in the list. So back into the Visual Basic Editor, and then back to the code behind the Add New Genre button, and we'll add a little bit more code inside our current existing if statement. So what we're going to try to do is find the value that the user's entered in the text box in the range of cells in column G. This is probably easier to achieve if we have a variable, so I'm going to declare a variable called r as a range. This represents a cell in which we find the genre we're looking for. So what we can then do is inside the if statement, as long as we have typed a value into the text box, we're going to try to set R to be equal to WS lists dot range G1 dot current region. Current region refers to the entire block of cells in which range G1 sits. So it's almost like going into Excel. If I can just really quickly demonstrate, clicking on cell G1 and then pressing Control A on the keyboard. So it returns a range of cells in which G1 sits. So it's everything up to the next blank row and blank column. So within that range, I'm looking for the value that the user has typed in. So I go back to the Visual Basic Editor. So I'm going to try to say .find, and then refer to the new genre text box .value. So new genre .value. What I'll end up with then is if the value has been found in the list, it will return a reference to that cell, to that range object, and store it in the range variable. If I can't find that value, then what that means is that R will contain nothing. And I only want to continue adding this item into my list if R has not been found. So we can nest another if statement now. We can say if R is nothing, then I want to add in all these lines of code, and then don't forget the extra end if statement right at the end there. So that will neatly avoid duplication in our list. If we just give this one a quick test, back into Excel and launch our form one more time, let's add superhero and then add new genre, and there it goes. If we try to do it again, it won't get added in more than once. We could probably do with some validation code that maybe changes the colour of the label, or changes the background colour of the text box, or just clears the contents, or pops it with a message, but you probably have enough tools in your armoury at this point now to work out what you could do from this point on. The important thing here is that we avoided the duplication. One additional neat thing that we could do is, once we've added a new item into our list, is we could sort that item alphabetically as part of the list on the worksheet, so the next time the form gets loaded, it's in the correct place alphabetically in the list. So to do that, let's just close down the form again, and we'll head back to the lists sheet, and we can, I'm just going to delete the superhero genre again so we can add it in again later on. And then let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we're going to go back to the click event of the add new genre button, and add an extra line of code in just below where we've added the new genre to our list. So here we're going to say wslists.range G1.currentRegion.sort, and then there's a couple of parameters to fill in. So key 1 refers to essentially the first cell, the first sort column, if you like. So key 1 colon equals wslists.range G1. There's only one column to sort by here. The next thing we want to do is make sure that we're going to, the Excel detects that there is a column header in that column. So by default, the headers is set to no. So we're going to set the header parameter to be colon equals Excel yes. Just a quick little bit of tidying up so you can read all that on one screen with. There we go. And then what we can do just to test this is go back into Excel, and then back onto our menu sheet, and then show the form on screen, and let's have superhero added to the list. So that should be added into the list of genres again. When the form's loaded, it's or currently still loaded, it's going to be sitting at the bottom of the list, but that's okay for now. If I close the form down and then show the form again, we should find this time that superhero has been sorted alphabetically into the list. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseOwl website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.